everybody. Welcome, gentlemen. I'd like to, before we start, kind of just set the stage in space and time about what was happening for each of you, what was happening in the world and in Bellingham when each of you were the mayor. Okay, so Mayor Hertz, 1976 to 1983. You got the bicentennial, Jimmy Carter, Star Wars, Sally Ryder was the first American woman in space, and stagflation. Does that sound familiar?
Carter comes familiar.
And then what was happening in Bellingham during your term, a lot of historic preservation, safeguarding Fairhaven in particular, environmental activism, the Hertz Trail, urban planning. ChatGPT said the following, which I think you would agree with, and I think your colleagues would agree with this. But between 1976 and 1983, Bellingham, Washington was quietly transforming from a working-class port town into the beginnings of the progressive, green, college-anchored city we know today. Does that resonate?
That resonates. I think, I look at way back in 1976. That's a long time ago, right? That's not too long. In any event, I think the biggest change in 1975, the city charter changed to a strong mayor system. And prior to 1975, it was a disaster. The city had good old boys as department heads, and no city can run without good people in a department head level. I don't care who's mayor. If you don't have a good set of department heads, it's a disaster. People were picked off the street to serve as police chief. People were picked off the street to serve as planning director, as park director. And I can look at that as being the most significant change to set up a good set of, now you don't always pick the right people, but you pick them most of the time based on qualifications and not good old boys. And I think that was the biggest change. And the other change that we really focused on was downtown, trying to pick up some of the remains of the downtown area, put together a street pattern, a sidewalk pattern. Tim mentioned the bollards. Called it Ballardham one time. Yeah. In any event, there was an effort put together to renovate the downtown, and I think that was a big plus. The other big plus as far as planning goes, I think we instigated a neighborhood process, or generally in the past it was planning the city as a whole. We planned neighbor by neighborhood, 21 neighborhoods. I think there's a lot more now, but it certainly was a good step in the right direction, and it's been followed through since then.
I want to just call out to the audience, like, I think when you listen to these three talk, you'll see these themes where something that Mayor Hertz did was changed by Mayor Douglas and then was added to by Mayor Asmundson. And it's interesting to see from this start, what do we have today? So I think you'll hear that throughout the evening tonight. Okay, Tim Douglas, Mayor Douglas, 1984 to 1995, you got Reagan. Nelson Mandela was released after 27 years in prison. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the LA riots, the Simpsons, and the Americans' Disability Act was passed. And then what was happening in Bellingham during your term, and then you can certainly add to these comments, is that, let me back here. Environmental stewardship, more urban planning, a lot of civil engagement and community building, and the beginning of housing and housing affordability issues in Bellingham. Does that resonate with you?
Tim gets credit for all of those things except the Simpsons. He personally brought down the Berlin Wall.
Oh, yes. Thank you. It's always nice to be ensconced between two comedians. I'll try to add some info too. One of the things that really struck me as I was thinking back on what really happened that was really significant in the time I was mayor, and I could tell you one of the most exciting things for me personally as I look back is what we did to attract the relocation of the Alaska Marine Highway system to Bellingham. And that was the first time that I can remember in our life in Bellingham where the community has really pulled together around a sort of a common commitment to something and really worked it. We had Ken and David Siree, before I came on, had worked on a sort of a strategy for economic development because we were, still in the world of hurt financially. It was a horrible time, much worse than anything we've experienced that I can remember since. But anyway, one of the things that this contractor came up with his recommendations to us is look at your own history. Bellingham has been strongly connected with the area north, but particularly up into Alaska. And there is a long history of Bellingham with Alaska, from fisheries, high-seed fisheries, to all sorts of other things. Dawson Construction and others had done projects up there. Haskell, right, with the refinery business stuff. So anyway, they said, look to your strengths. So look north and realize that you are not just the end of the United States up here. You are on a major freeway going between two major cities, Seattle and Vancouver. And so you should think about that as number one. And two, think what you could do with Alaska. And right at that time, the Alaska Marine Highway system was still ending. Its southern terminus was in Seattle. And we went down there. We worked really closely with the Port of Bellingham, the county, the city, private enterprise, citizens, and everybody. And we said, yeah, we should do something about this. I remember going down and seeing what they had in Seattle, and my God, it was like nothing. It was such a small fish in a big pond that they could care less down there. And it showed. There was one tattered little posting somewhere about where you could get parking near that, as if it didn't make any difference at all. And so we put together this film or this video and played it, which really played up the strengths of Bellingham. At that time, the mall had been open, so we had a major retailing center. And so we did this thing that showed, that we took up to Southeast Alaska to show them and talk to their legislators about the idea of relocating, because it was time for the contract to end in Seattle anyway. And I remember we ended after all sorts of things. We said, and if the Marine Highway continues to terminate in Seattle, here's what you will look at when you arrive. And it was just horrible traffic. I mean, as far as you could go and way up the freeway. And then we said, well, on the other hand, here is Bellingham. And of course, we had this mall, and you could just shop here. You had no reason to have to go down to that mess in Seattle and stuff. And we expected to get about 40,000 passengers a year coming. And then, of course, the port built that beautiful building, the cruise terminal, which is still a real great architectural landmark here. And the main thing I will have to say to those of you from the South Side in this audience is Southside really pushed back on that effort. They did not want to have that down here because they said, oh, there'll just be cars parked forever. We'll never be able to get to and from. Well, we said, no, we don't think so. And when it was over, it was if they had never said that, because none of that ever transpired. So that was just an example. The main thing I'm trying to say, though, is Bellingham, through that, really awakened to the fact if you want to do something and you put your effort into it, you can accomplish something. And people in Bellingham looked at each other and said, oh my gosh, we never thought we could do anything like that. And it was just like a huge eye-opener and changed a lot of things. So that's my comments.
Great. Well, thank you. Okay, Mayor Asmundson. So your term was 1996 to 2006. We had the Good Friday Agreement and peace in Northern Ireland. The British returned Hong Kong to China. We had the U.S. war in Iraq to oust Saddam Hussein. Hurricane Katrina. This was not a great period. Sorry about that, Mayor. 911. We did get Wi-Fi and Facebook. Those were the historical events during your tenure. And then as far as the city, your leadership was known for the waterfront, because GP closed down, opening up opportunities to the waterfront, environmental leadership, green power. You had the Olympic pipeline response, which was a big part of your terms. And you were also known for community forums, public meetings, and public and transparency in government, which I like to attribute to your attorney background.
I think that that's probably right. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're probably right, Kirsten. Now, for everyone that's here, I need to not answer anything she said because I'm closer to have being an elected official than these gentlemen are. Ken Hertz brought Bellingham into the modern era, without question. Bellingham, it's changed night and day. I was born in Bellingham. I grew up. I knew all those good old boys who ruined everything. John Westford was a mayor for 2 terms when I was a kid. He was my cousin. Bellingham's population from the time I was born till I graduated from high school probably didn't change by 100. It was a dirty little mill town. I remember when I was in college being mortified reading in Time magazine an article about the new Clean Water Act, and here was a picture of Bellingham Bay as an example of the horrors of pollution prior to the adoption of the Federal Clean Water Act. Nobody knew any Bellingham or where I worked and stuff, but I was embarrassed. Ken brought Bellingham into the modern era, no question, night and day. It's like an entirely different community followed Ken's leadership. He was a very, very strong leader. Some people said he was an asshole. Nowadays, that's okay to say. I've discovered. But those are only people who didn't particularly appreciate the fact that the good old boys were not just appointing their brother-in-laws and their sons, et cetera, to all those super lucrative city positions, et cetera. They weren't super lucrative, but it was still abysmal. Then Tim came along, and Tim was a wonderful steward, and Ken created the neighborhood system in Bellingham. Tim nurtured it and fostered it throughout the time he served as mayor. Tim worked so well with the neighborhoods, and that I think that between Ken and Tim, for the first time, just average citizens felt they really, really had a direct voice in what was going to happen in the city. And then I came along, and but what Tim says about it's funny thinking about the ferry terminal and going back a little bit to the old boy thing. I lived with the Alaska Ferry as being a part of my life for probably 20 years, because my dad was a port commissioner for 35 years, all right? And he was a port commissioner when that beautiful building was built. It was near the end of his term, and I remember him talking about all the work that was being done and the intergovernmental work that was being done in order to have that become a part of the community. And it was a remarkable time. The other thing that's remarkable is the change in Bellingham since Ken was originally elected. In fact that Ken was elected is kind of a miracle because, as I said, Bellingham was a dirty little mill town, and it was very conservative in its politics. And it took a really canny person to focus on what could be without scaring people, politically, and electing somebody really competent. Tim was an organizer who managed to reach through using, his organizational skills to work with the neighborhoods and carry that forward. When I ran, it was still a 50-50 town. Really, it was a very 50-50 town. In fact, when I ran the first time, my opponent was the operator of a toy store who everybody thought he was a sure thing, that he was going to win. He had all the money. Lynn Carpenter was the finance director. She supported him. She was a horror. She was. And it didn't turn out that way. I finally learned how to run a campaign. Well, I didn't. Joy Keenan taught me how to campaign, and I won. And the politics of Bellingham started changing. I mean, when I say the politics, they didn't change because of me. The demographics of Bellingham started changing, and the politics changed along with them, to the point that, for example, a moderate Republican or a moderate Democrat would have a hard time getting elected as mayor in Bellingham right now. Bellingham has moved tremendously to the, they quote, left since then. But when you're the mayor, well, the things that are happening around in the outside world, the larger world, as you described, Kirsten, are important. They're not issue number one for the mayor. The mayor is focused on what are the issues affecting my community at this time. What do our citizens, what do we want for our community to be? Because this is where it's at the local, it's always driven me nuts. People get excited about presidential elections, and almost always, until right now, who you voted for in the presidential election had far less to do with what your life was going to be like than who you voted for in your local elections. That's where the impact was going to be. So I was elected at a time where I had, for example, the third time I ran, I had 4 opponents in the primary, 3 of whom were Democrats, okay? And 1 of whom was in jail. And he didn't have much of a likelihood of winning. But the politics of Bellingham changed a lot. But it didn't change so much, and the change that the issue that Tim brought up about the South Side and their opposition to the ferry terminal, I remember doorbelling for my third term just a few blocks from here, and there was a guy working in his garage, so I walked up and had my materials, and I said, "Hi, I'm Mark Asmundson. I'm the mayor, and I'd appreciate it if you'd support me in the election." He said, "I'm not voting for you." And I said, "You mind if I ask why?" He said, "No, it's fine." He says, "You're making the town too nice. People will want to move here." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "That overwater walkway, the farmer's market." He said, "There's all, and he had a list of every, kind of premier issue that I'd worked very hard on with many, many other people in the community that he viewed as being real negatives. And so I actually suggested to him, "Do you suppose we'd be better off if we hauled some burned out automobiles and put them at all the exit ramps from I-5? And he knew I was joking, and he said, it could be a start, Anyway, the politics changed and the economics changed so dramatically. When Tim was mayor, I happened to own a piece of rental property that I'd purchased from another cousin. I couldn't rent a 3-bedroom apartment in a triplex that had a formal dining room, a covered deck, maybe 2 or 3 bathrooms for $135 a month and get a 6-month lease without giving a free month's rent. Yeah. Bellingham was in the toilet. That was when Tim was mayor. It wasn't his fault. At all. I mean, it was. It was
Bollards, stuff in the toilet.
bollards.
Clean up your act.
What happened? I think that there were several incremental things that happened, but I think the expo was what brought people from the south through Bellingham, and they saw, oh, there's another town up there. Because when we would deal with the state legislature, I guarantee you, when I started, the legislators believed the state stopped at Everett. There was no attention paid to Bellingham. There was no money spent on Bellingham, etc. I took too much time.
No,
The world has changed a lot. Now, the irony is that we get to talk about these are really good old days, and we've had some really wonderful mayors, and I'm sitting with 2 of them. Well, I'm sitting with them, and we have a wonderful mayor right now. But none of the things that are good in Bellingham happened by accident. The reason there are sidewalks and curbs between Cornwall Avenue and the Sunnyland neighborhood is because Ken Hertz used community development block grant money to make it so. The reason the #1 bikeable and walkable neighborhood in all of Bellingham is the lettered streets is because Ken put in the one-way street grid system. And it's not like I can't find similar things for Ken. Nothing happens by accident. The other thing I said at the beginning is how important local elections are compared to others. Well, Donald Trump is proving the lie to what I just said. There are times when a national election is of earth-shattering and earth-shattering consequence. But I'm glad we can talk about Bellingham, but he is the existential threat we all face.
thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. So we have some questions because we're the League of Women Voters. We always have questions. And they are focused on the thing that we love, which is the thing that you all have committed a big chunk of your lives to, which is civic engagement, government, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to start out. And we always say in our forums for elections, our candidate forums, thank you for running for office, because we know that it's really hard work and really challenging. So my first question is about running for office. And I'm going to start with you, Mark. Okay, you're ready to go.
I'm ready to go.
Okay, how did you decide to run for office? And if you were back then, knowing what you know now, would you do it again?
I'm really grateful that I did. I'm really, really grateful. It's the best time in my life was being my whole career was public service. I did 9 years on the city council. I did 11 years as mayor. I retired. I resigned a year early and to take the job as director of the Northwest Clean Air Agency, where I worked for the remainder of my career. So I love my public service career, but it was my municipal government service that was the greatest. Campaigning is not the most fun thing in the world. What I liked best about campaigning was doorbelling, where you got to talk one-on-one with people. Now, a lot of people don't like to answer their door, but the people that did, even the guy that told me that I was making the town too nice, I enjoyed talking to him, okay?
So you ran because
I ran,
you just
God.
loved the work.
No, okay. You want to know why I ran?
Yes.
I've been
How did you
involved in
decide?
politics since I was 13 years old. I was working on campaigns in 1964, okay? And I'm a weirdo, all right? I've just been fascinated, but it's all been motivated by two premises. One is more brains are better than fewer, and that people of goodwill, when they work together, they can come up with solutions to virtually any problem that they face. And that has been the motivating principle of my life and my public life, and it's what caused me to be interested in politics as a volunteer and politics as a candidate.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Douglas, same question. How did you decide to run for office, and would you, knowing what you know now, would you do it again?
Well, let me start by saying, if it were the year of the pandemic, absolutely not. I feel for any executive
Right.
who served during that time. It was so far different from anything any of us have had to deal with. I just feel for them. Well, that all sorts of things have evolved as part of that. First of all, I think this is just the greatest job. I've done a lot of different things, but this has always been the thing that stimulates me. And I think it's partly because when I was a kid, my parents really believed in community building. I was raised in Bellevue, and they helped build a place, a log recreation building and stuff that the whole part of the community used and stuff. And they were just very active and really believed. And they always set a model for me of you really do stuff with and for the community. That is a lot of what life is about. And I still believe that. And it's one of the things that attracted me to run for mayor, because I was in an era in which being active in your neighborhood was really one of the ways in which you, even if you weren't intending to start with on running for mayor or even city council, it just happened because people were so active. And Ken, I want to say a couple things quickly about Ken, because this reflects it. Ken, when he put together that comprehensive plan, our really first true comprehensive plan that was the neighborhood thing and everything, we had I'm sure it was over 2,000 people that went out into their neighborhoods and just noted things they liked and wanted to preserve and things they felt needed to be changed. And that all got compiled and stuff, and then we ended adopting a comp plan that took into account all of that. And that was sort of the blueprint for a lot of the stuff that we continued with. And that was because the community was so involved. I happened in my neighborhood, the thing that got me going was we had a truck route. The truck route, Roeder Avenue truck route was in, but the truckers were hauling gravel up to the cement plant, which was still operating then. And instead of following the Roeder Avenue thing and going a little bit out of their way to get up to there, they decided to go right through our neighborhood, which was not an official truck route. And we went to the city council and said, this is terrible, because they would go kaboomity, boomity, boomity, like 3 times a month, all night long, these big tandem trucks, and gravel was spilling out. Was spilling out, and so to speak. I was just trying to emphasize my point. And anyway, the neighborhood really got together and said, this is unacceptable. And we went to the Good Old Boys Council, and they just said, no, that's a truck route. This is what the truckers want, and we're just going to do it. And so we said, well, that's just not acceptable. Well, they pushed back and just said, So then we started going in front of these trucks. We would drive at 5 miles an hour, just in front of them. And they were just, oh my God, I thought we were going to get killed. Fortunately, nothing violent ever happened in that. But
Your own little neighborhood protest.
it was our neighborhood protest. And I think partly through that, I got to know a lot of other neighborhood people in the city. And so when Ken decided not to run again, I just thought, well, heck, I'm dean of students up at Western, so I've been an administrator. I've been on the city council for 2 terms as finance director of the council, and why not? This would be just a wonderful thing, and it's community building, and I really believe in that, so that's why I did it.
Well, thank you. Okay, Mayor Hertz, especially since you had the Good Old Boys, what was the impetus for you to run? Was it that?
By the way, just to mention, Tim got the most votes of any mayor ever elected in the city. I remember that.
That's because I ran against Haynes Fade. That's another story.
Well, I was a park director, the county park director at the time. And my training was in public administration at the University of Oregon. I had an advisor when I took my advanced degree that encouraged us to be city managers. I wasn't interested in city managers. They'd have fired me the first year. You just can't get stuff done as a city manager. I worked for a city manager, and it was almost an impossible situation. So when I was in parks, we were acquiring land, passed a couple bond issues. I was able to work with the state and federal government, work with the port. In fact, your dad, Tut, and Pete Zwanich and others. But acquiring the land was my number one goal. And I ran into a lot of opposition, both from some of the port people, from the county commissioners. We had a park board that had policy-making, hiring ability. The county commissioners approved the budget. That's about all they did. My impetus for running for mayor was the fact that I looked at what was going on. I remember one particular instance. Everybody knows Boulevard Park. We didn't have a boat launching ramp, so I acquired the old Joe Means boat building in Boulevard Park, which is now a coffee shop, Woods Coffee. Reg Williams, shouldn't mention names, but I'll mention Reg. His wife was working for Foss Tug and Barge at the time. They didn't want anything changed down there. They didn't want that industrial area changed. So they lobbied the, I think it was Great Northern at the time, but lobbied the railroad to not let anybody cross the tracks at that point. And that kind of broke the straw. And I said, there's enough of this nonsense. I'm not a city manager. You can't fire me, council. I'll take the position and run after it. And if I get it, I get it. If not, I'll move on to my park where I don't get so much crap. So it was more of an opportunity to see a change than it was my desire to be mayor. Would I do it again? No, I wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't do it again because I don't see myself in a position, even if I was younger, in a position of doing that particular job. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed putting the department heads in office that were outstanding, particularly Terry Mangan, my police chief, went on to be chief in Spokane, but an outstanding person. When I left, he was always in charge. So, poor Terry died too young, but in any event, we had some great department heads, and there was a need at that time to make that change. That's the reason I ran.
So it sounds like there was just a special set of circumstances and a special desire from you that was just that moment in time.
That's correct.
Interesting. Well, we are grateful for it. That is for sure. We are very, very grateful for it. Thank you. Okay. Next question. We'll start with you, Mayor Douglas. What was the biggest challenge that you thought you would have when you became the mayor? And what turned out to actually be your biggest challenge as mayor? So what you thought it would be and what it turned out to be.
Well, first of all, when I first became mayor, we were just in such a world of economic hurt. I mean, you can't believe it was just awful. I was chair, as I said, of the council. Either I was on the finance committee or chair of the finance committee. And every year we were doing cutback budgets. We had less money than what we'd had the year before. And it was this whole as Ken has talked about and you have mentioned too, we were leaving the era of harvesting all sorts of natural resources, fish, timber, coal, etc. And there was just no future there at that point. And we had already started on this effort to do, as I mentioned, the Alaska Ferry thing, and we'd realized we had to do something to bring the economy back. And none of these things are things I did by myself. Just I think all of us feel like we worked in tandem with all our parts of the community to really get things done. And that was the biggest thing that was of concern to me, was how do we get things on track financially so that people have a decent living here compared to what we're experiencing right now.
Did that turn out to be the actual challenge when you were in office?
Actually, initially it was, but by that point we were already gearing up to deal with it. So probably not so much. I did want to mention, if I can, one other thing though. Booth Gardner, I respect as one of the best governors our state has ever had. He was just a tremendous guy, very personable, very responsive to people all over the state. He'd worked at Weyerhaeuser. You know, he's really a very talented guy. And I got Louise Bjornson. Louise may be in the crowd here somewhere. I don't know. Yeah, Louise is always there on things. So she was very concerned. We'd been working together on recycling and stuff, and she still does, in the neighborhood up there, Birchwood, near the then operating cement factory. And that thing was just coating the whole neighborhood with white cement dust. It was unbelievable. Both of us on the air thing had to deal with this all the time. So suddenly it became that Boeing wanted to have a place to dispose of all of their hazardous materials. And so at the time, it was possible for a cement plant kiln to be used to dispose of these things. And so the then existing cement plant said, wow, what a great idea. Well, we'll just do this for Boeing. And it turned out if that had happened, it would have been not just Boeing, but the whole West Coast. All kinds of toxic materials would have been brought up here to be burned up in that thing. And then, just like the cement dust, it would have floated out across the neighborhood, schools and all sorts of things and stuff. And boy, Louise was just livid about that. And so she talked to me. So I got a hold of Booth Gardner, who I had known to some extent, and said, Booth, this is awful. And Booth said, I will take care of this. He stepped right in. He said, no kiln burning of toxic waste will be permitted in the state of Washington. And that was all because Bellingham asked him to do it, and he stepped right up. A phenomenal thing I'll never forget. And also then forestry stuff. Booth, we had a time here, some of you may recall it, when they were clear cutting all the mountainsides on the other side of Lake Whatcom, just clear cutting it. Thousands and thousands of acres just suddenly gone, and the people there were furious and complained about it. And so I got some of the forestry people together and said, let's get you working together, because they were building their own roads and they weren't cooperating with each other, and they'd never met together ever. So they agreed to get together and stuff. And then we said, we've got to change forestry practices here in this watershed. And then we went to Booth Gardner and said, Booth, this is just unacceptable. He said, you are absolutely right. It's ending like this. And he just cut it off like that and said, no more of that kind of forestry. We've got to respect the environment in these stream corridors and stuff. So just, it was wonderful working with him. And all the environmental things were really needing to be tackled.
That's really interesting about Booth Gardner. I mean, I know his legacy, right? But that's crazy that you can call him up and say, hey, and he says, we'll take care of that for you. All right, Mayor Hertz, what about you? The thing that you thought would be your biggest challenge, and was that actually your biggest challenge? When you started, before you went into office, what did you think was going to be your biggest challenge, and what turned out to be your biggest challenge?
Well, the biggest challenge was to find the right people for the right jobs. That was my biggest challenge, and it is a challenge. The pay, when I was mayor, I was mayor for $25,000 a year. That was my salary. I was raising 3 kids, and trying to live on $25,000 a year. It didn't matter at that point, much to the chagrin of my family, but I wanted to do it, and that was the point. I would have done it if I could have done it for nothing. I'd have done it because I saw the deterioration in the town. But biggest challenge was finding the right people, and we searched high and low to get the right people. I had to release all the department heads except the fire chief. The rest, and that's not easy. You can talk to Mayor Kim about even, the two people that she replaced. And I don't know, I know you, Tim, and you, Mark, did the same thing. But when you had to go through the whole bunch of them, it wasn't easy. And it wasn't easy particularly because the council was part of the good old boy system. I want to mention something about the cement plant, because I was chairman of the Air Pollution Authority at the time. Mark, you were director of that operation. But we had so many complaints because of all the dust and a lot of the contamination that landed on cars, and people were crying and whining, constantly about it, and you can't blame them. So I called a meeting in the old school district building. Yeah. And I asked the Air Pollution Authority to be there, all of the air pollution people. I talked to Bud Norris at the time. He was.
Was Glenn Holman the director?
Yeah, he wasn't.
Yeah.
In any event, he was a commissioner in Skagit County, and I talked to Corky Johnson. He was on the commission. And I said, look, we're going to go through this meeting, and I'm going to call for the closure of that plant. And I want you to make the motion, and I want Corky to second it. Went through the whole thing. The place was jam-packed, even outside. I mean, just jam-packed. I'm going to make them, if we can't come to a conclusion here, we're going to take a motion to close the plant down. Bud Norris, I move. Corky, second. People just went crazy. You can't close that plant down. That's bread and butter. That's my job. What are you doing? Meeting's over. Bang, I'm out of here. But it's the same concept, Do something about it, but don't do something about it. Some of that stuff gets back and forth and back and forth. Oh, do it. But the only way you're going to do it is to close the plant down. You're not going to do it any other way. I looked at cement plants up in Canada all over the place. And the other thing, I want to just mention another thing too, because of our neighbors in Canada. We had a number of business people that, how it got in the Vancouver Sun, I don't know, but they were calling Canadians cheeseheads. Oh, you got a bunch of cheeseheads coming in. They weren't particularly welcome in Whatcom County at the time. I happened to be a former cheesehead. I was born in Regina. Paul Oldskamp, the president of Western, was a cheesehead. And we had other cheeseheads running around. But it came in the Vancouver paper. I had so many letters from so many people that just said, we're never coming to Bellingham again. We're not, it was very, 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 very confrontational. I got some nasty letters. So we got together, and Oldskamp and Corky and a number of other people that, or the chamber and so forth and so on, got together. We went up and met with the mayor of Vancouver, Mayor Bullrich at the time, met the city hall, presented him with a letter, and he presented us with a cheesecake. And the cheesecake and the photograph that was taken between myself and Bullrich at the time was front page in the Vancouver Sun in color, which is kind of cool. That just softened the whole blow. Never heard of anything after that.
We need to send some people up to Canada.
We need to send people
I
up to
think we have to
Canada.
do that again and see if we can get ourselves a cheesecake.
Go find the cheeseheads.
Yeah. All right. Mayor Asmundson, what about you? Thing you thought would be the biggest challenge, thing that ended up being the biggest challenge?
I knew the biggest challenge would be, no, when I say I knew, that means I had no clue. I thought the biggest challenge would be to get all of the city departments to work in coordination with each other. We had several excellent department heads, and we had several that were not excellent. And I remember my friend Tim saying, as I described one to him, he says, on his way out the door, well, that's a problem you're going to have to deal with. And I did. And I did. And, but as Ken said, it's not fun to fire people, but you have to if they're not doing the job. And it is in the nature of city departments to operate as silos. They do not want to work together. And the biggest silo of all is the Public Works Department, because they're the only department that makes money. Yeah. They send water bills out. And by the way, read your Bellingham Herald today and think about that. So I thought the biggest issue was going to be getting a team together that would work together as a whole. And I succeeded. We had a dream team. By the time it was done, it took a long time to get everybody, but they were just really firing on all cylinders and working wonderfully. The pipeline explosion was absolutely unexpected and horrible, a horrible thing for the families. I knew all the families. I was born in Bellingham. I grew up on Eldridge Avenue when all those damn limestone trucks would go down the road to the cement plant. When I was in high school, I remember being old enough to have friends who lived out there, and they would just stop by every year or two to get a certificate from the cement plant to get their cars repainted. I mean, they were handing them out. You didn't even have to prove anything. Just go up and they just repaint your car, and you get the windows replaced, because the acidity of the dust was just awful in the Birchwood and Alderwood neighborhoods. It was just, I mean, it was the ultimate in lack of environmental justice, for sure. But okay, so getting the department head team together was great. Pipeline was terrible. Knew all the families, knew all the kids. Marlene Robinson was the attorney, was the administrative assistant for the city attorney's office. She's my cousin too. Now, why do I say that? I'm Icelandic. Every Icelander in the world is a cousin. There's so few of us, okay? And we are. I mean, that's a fact. I mean, I'm not making that up. I mean, it's a fact. Every Icelander is related to every other Icelander. So Marlene, she's also a cheesehead too. In fact, my grandparents they came from Iceland into Gimli out in Saskatchewan near Manitoba, and then moved down to North Dakota, and then came out to Bellingham. But anyway, way more information than you want to know. But the pipeline was a horrible thing for the people. It was horrible. The environment's very powerful, and I knew the creek would be able to. It would be restored. It would grow back. The families that just awful. But I became extraordinarily actively involved in lobbying in Washington, D.C.
For pipeline safety.
For pipeline safety, and we got a federal act adopted. I remember planning on meeting, I wanted to meet John Dingell, because he'd been in Congress more than anybody, and our lobbyist, who was wonderful, he said, only God talks to John Dingell. Well, John Dingell wanted to talk to me, and not because I'm wonderful, but he'd heard about this issue, because we pushed it hard, And we got a federal change in the federal law for liquid pipelines. Now, it didn't make it perfect, but it went a long way. We got lots of money in the settlement from Olympic Pipeline Company, and we designated it for the Pipeline Safety Trust to get them started. We got the state law changed, and I realized we need a lobbyist all the time. So we hired a full-time lobbyist for the state to deal with Olympia, and we had a retainer agreement for Olympia back in the days when we did earmarks, which is why you enjoy walking on the overwater walkway at Boulevard Park and things like that. And I can go on and on and on, and all those kinds of things. I mean, I learned that. But okay, so I thought the issue was going to be administrative. I spent the first year really getting to know how things were operating and who was really doing what, and getting to know the staff and really getting to know the department heads and finding the weaknesses. But what ended up being the real problem was astounding population growth by the end, and then in the attendant dramatic increase in the price of housing. And this is an issue that the state legislature has taken on directly. And I'll tell you, by the end of my term, I mean, I used to describe myself as the most liberal person I know. I don't think I am anymore, but I don't think I've changed. But I used to describe, after a while, I described Bellingham, after it got over the period of being conservative, I described Bellingham as being a reactionary liberal town. We have all the right values on all the important issues, just don't change anything near me. Just don't change anything near me. And I think that's probably still the case. And were it not for the state legislature basically eliminating single-family zoning, it would still be here. And I don't know if you've read Ezra Klein's book, Abundance, or are familiar with you're all familiar with the term YIMBY, which is yes in my backyard. But the argument he makes, and he's not really argumentative, but he says, you cannot be a progressive and be in favor of single-family zoning. It's not possible. You cannot be politically or ideologically progressive. You cannot be in favor of ending homelessness and providing housing and support single-family zoning. It's racist. It's socioeconomically exclusionary to an extraordinary degree, and we have ended up with a town where I live in the lettered streets. My grandparents lived in the lettered streets with a wood stove. I live in the lettered streets. It's a fabulous neighborhood. My house is worth $1 million. I mean, seriously. People can't. The first house I bought in Bellingham cost $6,850. And it was in the York edition. It's a wonderful house. It's still, it's probably worth $750,000, now. That's untenable. We have to have housing. We can't have housing if there's no more land. We have to change the way we use our land, and we have to love our fellow community members enough to be willing to share our community with them, including the land that our community is comprised of. So that's where it ended as being the big issue.
Which I think is still true today.
Yes.
Like, I don't think anything has.
I didn't solve it.
And I think we continue to work on it, obviously. But yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, when a starter home in Bellingham is $600,000, we have a problem.
We have a huge problem.
Yeah.
I remember standing at Fairhaven Middle School, the big meeting about the 100-acre wood. Okay. Now, the South Side is very blessed with open space and park facilities, and the issue was about whether or not this property, which had forever been zoned for development of housing, would go forward as it was zoned, or whether it would be denied, which would be illegal because of the zoning, or what ultimately happened, a park district was very carefully designed so as to get enough votes to purchase it and keep it from being developed. Well, I don't know if it was quite 100 acres, but the thing is, by taking that land out of the inventory of available land for housing, that action increased the price of every home in Bellingham, okay? And every time an acre is taken away, you're making housing more expensive. And every time the city takes an action, increasing water bills, increasing sewer bills, increasing connection charges, increasing garbage rates, whatever it might be, it makes housing less affordable, and it makes it so our city employees, our school teachers, our
Police officers,
everybody that works here
firefighters.
that is not at an executive level or living off a secondary form of income or have an extraordinary law practice or veterinary practice or the like, just can't afford to live. There's two kinds of people in the United States today, and that's true of Bellingham. There's people that worry about money all the time, and that's more than 50%. And there's a much smaller percentage, no, not much smaller. There's a percentage that don't worry about money. They don't have private jets. They're not in the 1%. They're not even in the 5%. But they don't worry about money all the time. And the people in power in Bellingham and in any other lovely community tend to represent the people that never have to worry about money. And I think we have to worry. I think elected officials have a duty to worry about the people that worry about money all the time.
Okay. You have a comment.
I do have a comment about affordable housing. I put my other hat on. I've been in the development business for a while. I think that the public agencies are making a big mistake and have made a big mistake by not stepping up with the infrastructure. I'll give you an example. Had almost 500 acres on the border in Blaine. That 500 acres took 20 years to plant for 1,000 houses, 1,013 houses. The biggest problem was the infrastructure. The county had $30 million of money, EDI money. It was under contract with a developer that was going to create a very, very environmentally sensitive project. Everything was well planned. The county did not want to step up. And that's not only the county. I mean, you take the port or you take the city. They need to step up with infrastructure when it's needed, even if it's on a loan basis, because you don't finance that kind of stuff.
You're absolutely right.
And I was just so disappointed. What happened to that piece of ground? Somebody bought it. Is not going to develop it. They're going to keep it as it is because it's nicer that way. Now and this property isn't in the floodplain. It's not forestry property. It's not. It's not sensitive.
It's not sensitive property
It's
at
not
all.
sensitive. It's perfect for that use. What happens? Nobody steps up. Nobody has the guts in
But-
government anymore
However,
to step up.
I'll give you one counter argument. You are right factually, except for with regard to Mayor Lund, who overruled the public works director who would not approve putting in adequate sewerage out on Meridian. You've seen the construction now, where 2,500 units of housing were imperiled because he said the bids were too high, as if the price is going to go down in the future. And she overruled him, and that infrastructure is being put in place.
And that's the kind of thing that has
That
to
has
take
to
place.
happen.
I used to get a lot of crap because we put sewer in the Guide Meridian area, or we put water in the Sunset area. But look at the growth. No, what did you do that for? Look at what happened. So, some of that stuff, if you've got to step up, the public agencies have to suck their guts up, step up and do some of this infrastructure. They got the money.
Can I
The borrowing capacity. Sorry. Go ahead.
Can I just add one comment on the housing thing? As we talked about earlier, when Joanna and I first got here in the 67, from when it started at Western, we had 2 apartments that we were able to choose from. That was all in Bellingham. And those were not high rents. They were nothing compared to, and not even close to today's rents. But there just was no housing capacity. Nothing was being built in Bellingham at that time, especially like in multiple housing. And I'm watching what's happening now and realizing when I was in office, fortunately, it was at a time in which we recognized we just did not have enough housing. And so what we did is we reached out to the development community and said, if we invested some infrastructure money, that is like in water sewer service, somewhere in Bellingham, where would you suggest? Where would it make a difference to you? And they were very responsive and came up with suggestions. Well, the main thing that either was to be way south, like way south of here, which would have been just horrendously expensive. So we couldn't do that. But just from Lakeway on down slope from Lakeway, as you go out of downtown, that area was not developed. It had streams going through, et cetera, but it had no water or sewer service. And so we decided we're going to do that. And okay, development community, we're going to do that. And you need to come forward then with really committing to doing some housing there. And we put the water and sewer service down to the bottom there, and we had we had a couple of brothers who were willing to do some building there, and canoyers, and they did the first ever of our neighborhoods that where we kind of concentrated on somewhat smaller lots and then kept greenbelt stuff around that and everything. It was the first time we'd ever pulled that off and had that, and they did a wonderful job, and it's continued to do very well there, and now we have the ball fields down there and all sorts of things. So it's become a really nice part of Bellingham and has really added housing. But we are going to have to do something very active like that to really seed things.
It's interesting. All 3 of you really were very strong in that, right? If we're going to deal with the housing issue, there has to be a partnership between the municipalities, government, and private. It's not going to happen with either one alone. Yeah.
If I can just throw out, since I'm so shy about my opinions, we have 2 low-income housing levies that we pay property taxes for, as well as I think 1/10% or 0.2% sales tax that go for, which is fine. And there is probably a bit of a role for the government to actually build the housing, maybe. We're doing that now. The Aloha Motel, for example, nothing wrong with it. It's just that per unit, it's really, really, really expensive when the government builds it, okay? We might be better off rethinking. Well, they didn't exist when you, Ken, and Tim were in office. They were put in place when I was in office, so it's my fault, okay? And they're the latecomer fees for the water and sewer system, and then after I left, the Parks Department. So where a building permit in the county for the identical same, let's say you're building a single-family home, it would be like $3,000 to $6,000 for the permit in the county, will be $30,000 plus whatever the permit fee is in the city of Bellingham because of quote, latecomer charges for the water and sewer and then your park impact fees. And so I hear, and honestly, I hear a whole lot of discussion, and I'm not picking on any council member because I hear it from state legislators too, talking about how important it is that we have compact communities, address climate change, make housing more affordable, while at the same time adopting things that just make it I mean, arithmetic is pretty simple. If you make a building permit costs $35,000 here, and in an area where somebody could actually catch the bus or walk to work or ride their bike, or $3,000 10 miles away where they have to drive, where are most people going to go when it's tough to get a mortgage at 7.5% today, you know? So I think we'd do better using some of the money instead of building things, underwriting the infrastructure to make it possible for things. Now, I'm not naive. I understand how business works. If you say we'll get rid of the impact fees for housing to lower the price of housing, the price of housing is set by the market. So just lowering the impact fees is not going to lower the price of housing. So if somebody's getting an advantage from the government who is a builder, they have to pass it on, and there has to be a mechanism to make sure that until we get to the point of equilibrium, where housing availability is expanding at the rate that people are moving to Bellingham, I think we're screwed. I don't think there's any solution. And we should get rid of these Airbnbs once and forever. Talk about ruining things. And what a waste of housing resource. And finally, nobody should own 2 homes. Period.
I love this conversation because this is probably the biggest, most contentious conversation in our community, over and over and over again. Other things flare up, but this one has been around a long time and we are still going after it. It's a really interesting conversation. So thanks for those answers.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt. When I say don't own 2 homes, I say you can have 2 homes. You can own 20 if you rent 19 of them out at fair market.
Okay,
but
good
don't
clarification.
own 2 for
you.
For you.
Okay.
You use 1 6 months of the year and leave it empty.
I'm going to talk to my sister. Yeah, I'll take care of that. Okay. The next question, we're going to start with Mayor Hertz. So what is the thing you are most proud of that was most significant, most meaningful to you? And you can only pick just one. You can pick 2 or 3 if you want, but what are the things like that you come away with that feel really good from your term? I should say terms.
There's so many, it's hard to believe. I don't know.
There are a lot, actually. So that's hard to pick.
You have one?
For me, from yours?
Yeah.
I do love the game changer, kind of we're changing the way we do business. I love that one. Okay. I personally am really happy about Fairhaven. Mm-hmm. It's like a little jewel that is very sweet for this community. But I'm curious about your...
Well, I think just a combination of things that I can't pick one out that is more important than the others.
Were any more fun than the others?
I don't think it's fun. I don't necessarily look at the 8 years that I spent in office as
for $25,000 a year was not loads of fun for you.
$25,000 a year, but it wasn't fun. I think it was hard work. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of emotional stress. I mean, you might please half of the people, but there's half of the people that aren't pleased. During those times, we had, Georgia Pacific putting pressure because, that's an employment base. Mm-hmm. Georgia Pacific goes away, the whole town will dry up. You remember that? So many of those, a very, very conservative group of people that really ran the community at the time, and changing that was a lot of work. I think that some of the fun things was doing some of the downtown landscaping and new sidewalks and the kinds of things that really made a difference still there. So that was neat. We had the railroad tracks going through downtown. We bought all those railroad tracks. In fact, we're the public market, which you created, I think, Mark, but that was part of the railroad property. Those kinds of things were really neat. Boulevard Park, just the starting. I didn't do Boulevard Park. I take credit for starting it and taking all the crap that goes along with that. But that was neat. We worked on the Alaska Ferry. Tim finished it. We started working on the Alaska Ferry. Met with the Governor Jay, what's his name? No,
John Spellman.
no, I was the governor of Alaska. But any event,
I know, Hammond.
Hammond, that's the guy. Yeah. That's those kinds of things were kind of fun. But no, I can't particularly pick one thing out.
Okay, fair enough. Mayor Douglas, what about you?
I think the way in which we sort of brought the community together in a much more livable way, that's an overall statement, and we've all had elements of it ourselves. But just the way in which the community is pulled together. And I'm thinking, too, of how fortunate we are in Northwest Washington to have a fine university, a fine technical college, and a fine community college. And I'm very active with the Community College Foundation now, and just the scholarship money that is being donated to help students achieve here, and the diversity of students that we're now seeing at all those institutions, and what each of them does in its own unique role to really help make education. I think education is like the prime mover in Northwest Washington in terms of quality of life and helping us attract really great people, and they want to come, and then they bring other very committed to community kind of people. I think education has been wonderful, and there's no one thing I've done to do that, but I worked at Western for years, and that was
It brought you
the
here.
beginning. It is.
It
It
brought
did
you
bring me here. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Tell me when it doesn't hurt. Mostly when I'm quiet, probably. I think that I'm proud of a lot of things, just because, like everything, you know, we're lucky to have Ken. We're lucky to have Tim. We're lucky to have people who cared about the community when it didn't pay worth shit. And I mean, when I left the mayor's office, and I had worked the council hard and gotten it up to, I think, 130,000 by 2006. Okay, it was, and this was a minimum 3 nights, at least 3 nights of
Right.
every week that you're out. Plus, you're working full time, and usually have something on a Saturday or a Sunday during the day. So you don't do it for the money. You do it for the fun. Really proud of a couple things. One of the things that happened when when I first got on the city council, and when I say got on, as opposed to elected, is I was appointed to the city council because to fill out an unexpired term of, God, I can remember Jay Hammond, but I can't remember your first permit director's name, who was, what's his name? From the 4th Ward, Dave Wolf. Dave Wolf quit, and I filled out the final year of his term, and I got appointed right when Bellis Fair was being considered. Okay, so I mean, all I know about it is what I read in the Bellingham Herald, which our community suffers greatly from not having a daily newspaper with a reporter covering local government. I think that's one of the tragedies of the internet, is the loss of local media. But that's an aside. So that was quite an interesting thing. And it was a tough decision because Tim advocated very strenuously against approving the mall because
You mean the Death Star?
yes.
That's what I understand. It was the Death Star in the day and like that. So people thought
Well,
it's
because,
just
I mean,
going to be the end to downtown.
The reality, and the thing is, I ultimately voted for it, and it was not easy. It was not easy, but I voted for it because I knew where we were economically, which was, as Tim said, in the toilet, and something had to change. And all of the downtown businesses, I mean, even the bigger ones, were saying, it either happens here or we're moving they'll build one in Skagit County and we'll move our store there. So that was what the option to us. Well, that did help kick off the economy in Bellingham. So, but it also kicked off a really robust discussion and debate in the community about the issue. And Tim, honestly, by having a contrary position to David Sirey and Ken, I don't know if you had got involved in that one, Ken, but you were working for Sirey at that time or not? What Bellis Fair? Not yet. Okay. But he kicked off. He kicked off. Well, I know you had. I've still got a bumper sticker, something like about screw them all or something. It hurts, about downtown. Anyway, but Tim got people involved that had never been involved in discussing the local things, and that's continued for years to come and beyond to go, and that was really good. So that was a great foundation for community engagement. So I got lots of community engagement for a variety of projects, like the bridge over Alabama that. Oh God, did people scream at me about doing that? What a horrible waste of public money. And the next day, the day after it was opened, I got an email from a woman saying, my son goes to Roosevelt School. I live on the south side of Alabama, and the first time since we've lived here, he got to ride his bike to school. And I wrote back and said, and that's why we built this, And how often is the railroad trail used? How many people complain about that bridge now? People even complained about the farmers market, for crying out loud. They complained about the overwater walkway at Boulevard Park. But the thing I'm most proud of, and this may sound so trivial, I'm very proud of all those. I'm very proud of the work we did very proud of the pipeline safety response. But most importantly was when I had a weekly meeting before the walkway had been, overwater walkway had been built at Boulevard Park. I had a weekly meeting with the parks director because I wanted to make sure he kept that at the top of his pile, because he had to deal with the Department of Ecology, which couldn't make up its mind about whether you pulled out the little pilings or snipped them off. And it took 2.5 years. It took 3 months to build the thing. It took 2.5 years to get the. Anyway, so I'm meeting with Paul, and he just mentions as an aside that the community college is going to. They've stopped using, or maybe it was the technical college, no longer offer the pottery program, and so the lease is up, so we'll be coming forward to tear that building down. And I said, no, you're not going to tear that building down. You'll never get a permit to build that close to the water again. It's a perfect place for a coffee shop, lease it out and have a place so people will come to the park year round and get together. Okay.
And the pottery place went to Whatcom Community College.
It did. It went to the campus. So that's what so anyway, he was going to tear it down. But anyway, so the next time you have a cup of coffee at Boulevard Park, you can think about me. And I still think
you,
Woods
Mark.
owes me
Thank
coffee
you for that oat milk
life.
latte.
Let me just two quick additions. One, greenways. We haven't spoken about it. This audience is responsible for greenways, and congratulations to everybody in Bellingham over the years. The tens of millions of dollars that we have agreed to tax ourselves to put in to buy open space, to improve parks, to buy parks, trails, everything. It is what makes this community what it is. Ken really was the lead on greenways, and we've all supported it all along the way. But that's just a fabulous thing. The other thing I just wanted to mention quickly is we did work hard to, at the time the mall was going to, we got the word from the mayor of Tacoma. He said 7 years. Your downtown will be dead for 7 years after that mall is built. And so he said, well, not any more than it has to be. And so we really got to work, and we worked with the owners of the private buildings where the department stores had been. And we did some really creative things in terms of financing. Certain things helped provide some parking, added a,
Do you think he was right about the 7 years?
Yeah.
it was pretty close, but we
Interesting.
really, if we hadn't done it, I don't think 7 years would have even been close to how long we'd be dead downtown.
So you're in trouble, Tim, because there's two microphones close to us. But on the same theme, this, when I first got elected, remember the pit? How old are you?
Yes, the pit, for sure.
That was the burned out building on the corner of Holly and Railroad, and it was. So that was. It burned at the end of Tim's term, and I came, and so my theory, downtown was of course a big focus for me because it still was not coming back, but I viewed downtown will be a success when we see a crane downtown and we see people living downtown.
Yeah.
Because you have to have people living downtown for your downtown to really thrive. And that's why I'm very happy now. I mean, it didn't all happen because of me, but I'm really happy getting the ball rolling for, and I mean, we bought that land and we gave the most sweetheart lease in the world to get that building constructed on the corner of Railroad and Holly. And we what's the word? We condemned the Flame Tavern, and Rick Westrup then we got it and built the housing, and he proved that downtown housing worked. And then he built all those other buildings to the south, and the rest is history. But the government has to come in with investment to provide support for those key elements so proof of concept can be established. Yeah.
Since you're talking about the mall, I just want to say I fought that damn thing for 4 years.
Yeah.
And we had a developer out of Canada called Sutter Hill Corporation
Yeah.
that was going to do a downtown mall.
Yeah.
We had to build, talking about infrastructure, we had to build 2 parking structures. And it was going to cost some public money. We had a petition against it, and it lost by 100 votes. And that's when the mall basically was approved. Said, to hell with it. You don't want to do something here. It's got to be there because you're going to lose all of the retail.
Yeah.
And that's when I said, I'm out of here.
So we have come to the end of our time. It's 8:00. I have to tell you, it's so interesting. And I will say this, perspective, like looking back at things and perspective, like I'm going to take so much of this conversation into whatever's happening in Bellingham today. When the mayor does something or the council does something. I mean, your comments about the controversy around things that are foundational to our community, the ferry terminal, the walkway, all of the things. And so it's just I don't know about all of you, but it's a really interesting conversation to hear perspective. So you guys have almost 40 years of service to this community together.
And we're still alive.
And
Still alive.
you're
not much, but we're still alive. I just wanted to say one thing that I suggested. It's been 50 years since the charter was changed, and there's been 7 mayors that are still alive. I thought it would be kind of cool to get them all together, including Kim. But that was my thought behind talking to.
And I think two are abroad. two are traveling far and wide.
Well, they can
Yeah.
come back for this.
We'll have to, yeah, it's been a great conversation, but really, thank you so much for everything that you've done. As I was walking around downtown at lunch today, I thought to myself, this is a spectacular little burg we have, despite all of our issues and problems, and really so much of it to each of your credit. So I hope you all will join me in giving these folks just this amazing round of applause, and thanks for everything.